My name's Ross Gardler, as Adair just said. I have two roles today. The first role is as a representative of the Apache Software Foundation. I work there as a volunteer, like everybody does in Apache, as the executive vice president at this point. I've had many roles, director, president, and of course I'm a committer and contributor on a number of projects. I'm going to be talking about Apache a fair bit and why Apache is important to me. And the reason that it's important to me, or rather the reasons it's important to me, is what brought me to Microsoft. So 5 years ago I joined Microsoft. That was before Microsoft loved Linux. That was before we had Satya. But I'd been watching Microsoft for quite some time, and I'd felt that there was going to be a change. That Microsoft was definitely starting to talk the right language. And today, it's fairly obvious that that was correct. Way back then, though, all of my peers, my colleagues kind of patted me on the head and went, there, you'll get better. But today, Microsoft truly does love Linux. And so, why is Apache important to me? Why is the way that we build software important to me? And why did I find myself at Microsoft, specifically in the Azure Compute team, where I'm part of the team who are responsible for ensuring Linux is a first-class citizen on Azure. I created Azure Container Service a couple of years ago. You just heard the announcement of our latest step in that organization. I've recently moved on from that. I'm about to do the next thing in that space. And we'll talk a little bit about not what that is going to be, but how I'm going to go about it and the innovations that we're looking to generate. So how many people have heard the term combinatorial innovation before? A few, okay? I'm going to try and explain what it is through a couple of quotes. The first quote is from Steve Jobs. Creativity is just connecting things. So the idea is that to create new things, typically you don't just create something out of nothing. There are things that you bring together and connect together in different ways, which in itself is creative. That's an example of combinatorial innovation. It's innovating by combining things in new and different ways. Brian Eno said you should stay alert for the moment when a number of things are ready to collide with one another. Same thing, look for these moments when you can be creative, when you can be innovative by bringing together things that are going to collide anyway. Just make it happen more quickly and apply it more quickly. So that's what combinatorial innovation is. And for me, that's the biggest strength of the Apache Software Foundation and the way we develop software. And in the broader scheme of things, in the Linux ecosystem, in the open source ecosystem generally. So how is that? This is what combinatorial explosion looks like when you draw the Apache Software Foundation as a bunch of dots and lines. So each of these dots is a project within the foundation. The size of the dot is the activity in the dot in terms of the number of committers, the number of activity that's the amount of activity that's going on. The lines are committers who are engaged with that project, but also engaged with another one. So they connect two projects together through a committer. Now in Apache language, a committer is somebody who has direct access to the repository. It's somebody who is responsible for that project moving forward. In GitHub terms, it's a maintainer of the project. So these aren't contributors connecting, these are actually leaders within the software project connecting. And what you get is combinatorial innovation. You get ideas and innovations from one project going over to another. And this is why Apache has been one of the most successful foundations over the last 18 years, 22 years if you count the 3 years before we were actually an official foundation. So what does that mean in terms of scale? Well, we get about 35 million page views a week. We get page views from every single internet-connected country on the planet, often ones from planes and things like that. At any one time, there are millions of people connecting with the Apache organization and looking for opportunities to bring things together. We have over 300 projects inside of the foundation. You'll all have heard of some of them, things like the Apache Web Server and Hadoop and so on. But there's 300 others. Some of them are tiny, something like Log4j. Tiny little project, but it's in 98% of all Java applications. Fundamentally important to innovation in open source and in closed source as well. There's 100 million lines of functional code. That's not white space and comments, that's executable code. Now, measuring KLOC is not really that valuable, but it just gives you an idea of the scale of what's been happening. Over 25,000 authors in the last year have posted over 2 million emails to our mailing lists, sharing ideas, combinatorial explosions. That's over 8,000 topics, 8,000 potential innovations, 800,000, sorry. And then 9 million source code downloads. These aren't even the binary downloads of people who are just going to run this stuff. These are people who want to get at the code and work on the code. 9 million in the last year. All that amounts to an estimated 65,000 person years of effort and a value of over $7 billion. And it's all free. Take it, build your business on it. Why would we want you to build your business on it and take it? Because the economics of open source and the benefits of combinatorial innovation mean we know you're going to come back and you're going to contribute in positive ways. You're not required to do so. We just know that economics are going to make enough of you want to do that, that we continue to grow, as we have done for the last 18 years. So how does it work? How does it work? How many people in here actually work on Apache projects? Hey, excellent, quite a few. So you guys know how it works. Feel free to shout out if I say anything stupid, because the key thing about the Apache Software Foundation is we have very, very few rules. The projects lead how things work. So many software foundations and projects, they focus on the project. They focus on outputting the value from the project itself, on serving the users of the project. In Apache, we actually focus on the community, not the project. Our belief is that if we build good communities, then they will collaborate together and good code will emerge. So rather than saying we know what the right code is as a foundation, we say we know how to support communities in building code. And communities will self-organize and build the right code. So we emphasize reuse of the software through those communities, and that's what forces people to componentize the software. So rather than looking at building a complete project, we build components that people then bring together in new and creative ways and innovate upon them. That reuse leads to combinatorial innovation through collaboration. So it's community over code. We do not manage projects. The Apache Software Foundation does not manage projects. As the president, executive vice president, or any of the roles that I might have had, I have zero influence over individual projects. My job is to make sure the foundation continues to run so those communities continue to build good software. The only way I can influence those projects is to become a committer and contribute in meaningful ways through code, or through documentation, or through user support, anything that strengthens the community. The foundation exists to protect the independence of the projects. Because if the projects become dependent on any individual organization, whether that be a for-profit or a not-for-profit, we're no longer allowing the community to define their own direction. We're allowing some external influence to define the direction. And that's not how you get the best out of combinatorial innovation. So how do we go about doing that? Well, first of all, we provide infrastructure. So our projects are free to use services like GitHub. But we insist that the code, the canonical repository of the code, is on Apache hardware, or on Apache managed hardware increasingly. And the reason for that is, if there's ever a problem with any of those providers, whether it be a cloud provider or a service provider like GitHub, we want to make sure that we can keep the community alive despite the breakdown of that commercial relationship. And that's what we do. We actually do this on a tiny budget, $5,000 per project. It's an amazing number. You know, it costs an absolute fortune for my company to run things that are tiny compared to Apache. We run some things that are a lot bigger as well, but it costs a lot of money. And that's one of the beauties of running as a volunteer foundation. We have lots of people who understand how to build open source software. We'll have lots of people who understand how to build infrastructure to support software. So whilst we have some paid staff building that infrastructure, we also have an army of volunteers. That keeps the price low. We do focus on modernizing. You know, we started 18 years ago, and literally,
there was no significant web server when we started. The Apache Foundation was created because we needed web servers. So there weren't any companies out there that we could go to for hosting. On day one, our web server was literally a box underneath somebody's desk. So we started off building our own infrastructure. But as things like SourceForge and then GitHub emerged, there become services that we can use. And so we spend a lot of time modernizing our infrastructure so that projects can use the things that they want to use while still defending their independence. We provide legal support through pro bono lawyers, and we also have cash available should that ever become necessary. That's absolutely critical, because if you contribute to an open source project, you shouldn't be putting your house at risk should somebody decide to create some kind of lawsuit. And that's what the foundation exists for, protecting you from that kind of risk. Trademark support is very, very important. Trademark support says nobody in this room or anywhere else in the world can use an Apache trademark to the benefit of their commercial interests. Now, you can say my product, Foobar, is powered by Apache, whatever, but you can't claim that yours is better because you own Apache or you're part of Apache. If we did that, if we allowed that, then you would have an advantage over other people. So nobody is allowed to do that, and we have trademark support to enforce those trademark rules. And then, of course, we have press and analyst relations and marketing. These do not market products built on top of our projects. These market the projects and the independence of the projects. These make sure that the world is aware that this is not a project owned by Company X or Company Y. It's a project built for the public good by volunteers in a charity registered in the US. We also provide financial security. It costs money to run a project. So, rather than requiring our projects to go out and find that money and therefore potentially become dependent on sponsors and commercial organizations, we take the money as a foundation and we provide a buffer between the sponsors and the project. What this ultimately means is no sponsor of the Apache Software Foundation has any influence over any one of our projects. More combinatorial innovation, because it means if you're a startup with 3 staff, pre-financing, you have as much input on an Apache project as my own employer, for example. Possibly more if you've been active within the project for some time and you have all 3 members of staff are on that project. We are continuing to grow as a foundation. We have loads of money in the bank. We are spending a lot of money on modernization and so on, as I mentioned earlier on. We are spending a lot of money on managing our growth. We continue to grow at a phenomenal pace. Fortunately, so does our sponsorships. That said, if anybody in the room wants to sponsor the foundation, we'd be very happy to work with you. So, end result of this, and getting into the state of open source and how open source is changing the ecosystem. This is a look backwards at what the Apache Software Foundation has done. Internet infrastructure, data management, content management, build management, big data. These are all areas of massive innovation over the last 18 years where Apache has been central to that work. There's a lot of things happened in the industry that frankly would have been very different if the Apache Software Foundation didn't exist. And these are all areas where we have had significant influence through our way of building open source software. So what's coming next? Well, we have this thing called the incubator. The incubator is where new projects come into the foundation. We're seeing a lot of growth in IoT. We're seeing a lot of growth in edge computing, which of course is related to IoT. Machine learning, huge amounts of growth there. Microfinance is a really interesting area that is showing significant growth as well. Microfinancing is the idea of providing banking and loan facilities and things to what's called the unbanked, so in developing parts of the world. Fascinating projects going on in that space. And then finally, cryptography. We have, I think, 55 projects in the incubator right now, so this is not an exhaustive list, but this is where we see multiple projects arriving in these spaces. So that's the Apache Software Foundation. We'll come back to that in a little while. But Microsoft. My employer is Microsoft. They're paying for me to be here today, and so why am I here? Why did Microsoft hire me, and why did I agree to join Microsoft before we had a CEO who stood in front of signs that said Microsoft love Linux? Well, first of all, I like to think it's because I saw the future, and that I knew one day I'd be able to stand up in front of a slide like this and know that it is absolutely true. It was a risk when I moved my family from the UK to Redmond. It wasn't definite that Microsoft were finally going to do this, but the signs were good, and now I can say, hand on heart, we are an open source company. So what does that mean, and why are we? This is a quote from Satya's recently published book, Hit Refresh. Our industry does not respect tradition. What it respects is innovation. Now that's a very powerful observation from somebody like Satya Nadella, the CEO of the traditional way of doing software in the industry. Microsoft grew up by not playing well with open source software. But Microsoft is recognizing that in the modern world, in the in the cloud world, open source is far more important than they had previously understood. So why is that? Well, this has not been a short journey. Way over here on the left-hand side, 2004, is the first time Microsoft released a piece of software as true open source. Prior to that, there were some others, but they weren't under true open source licenses. Wix was the first one. It's still an active project. It's an installer, a tool for building installers. And there's been lots of activity over the years. This is just a few of them. I first became engaged with Microsoft as an open source consultant over here, around about where it says PHP. A whole bunch of my colleagues went to Redmond, and they looked at how do you make PHP run well on IIS, Internet Server, and also how do we port Apache Web Server to Windows. Right over here, around about this point here, is when I joined the company. And things have really accelerated since that time. We've built partnerships, we've built software, and we've produced software. It is very different today how it was in 2004. It's very different today how it was even 5 years ago. So our approach as a company is really about this bottom piece here. It's about building open source partnerships and ecosystem for those partners. Microsoft became successful by building an infrastructure on which people built software for their clients. So Windows was a way for people to run their applications for their clients, to build their application for their clients. And Microsoft became very, very successful through that model. There's a whole load of other tooling and products that Microsoft created using that model. But today we live in a cloud world. And in the cloud, what we're selling is not shrink-wrapped boxes. We're selling essentially electricity. Okay? All right, there's some computers on the end of it and some very big buildings and so on. But at the end of the day, we're selling electricity. So we don't care what you're running. All we care is that we're providing the infrastructure that you can run, you can satisfy your customers, and we can therefore build healthy partnerships and ecosystems. And we do this in 4 ways. First of all, we enable. So we enable the software to run. That's obviously the first thing. So some time ago, Microsoft was the #1 contributor to the Linux kernel. We're not the #1 anymore. We still contribute significantly. But the reason we were the #1 contributor for that year is because we needed to make sure that the Linux kernel would run well inside of the Azure environment, which it does. Today, well over 1/3 of VMs on Azure are Linux VMs. Well over 1/3. We're growing faster than Windows on Azure, which is great, because that's my job. There is another team who's trying to make Windows grow faster, but I'm winning, which is good. That's the state of the penguin for you. So the first thing is about enabling the workloads. And we work with a lot of communities to enable those workloads. Not just Linux, but lots of infrastructure, lots of programming languages, lots of specific applications. The next one is about integrate. So we have a whole load of customers. Over the last 40 years of Microsoft, we've developed quite a large customer base. And those customers are already committed to many of the Microsoft products that are being moved into the cloud. And so we need to integrate with those products, but also we need to integrate our partners' products. So you see Red Hat banners all over the place. Red Hat are a very important partner to us because we have a lot of customers who want to run Red Hat Linux. We have many partners that we work with. There's just every slide I put up here, I put the odd logo, but we could put hundreds of logos up there for each one. Release is the next piece. If we're all in on open source, it's not just enough for us to work on existing open source. We need to open source our own technologies as well. So things like .NET Core, that is now open source. There are many technologies that have come out of Microsoft. I saw on one of Adir's slides, 3,500 open source projects coming out of Microsoft. And then the final one is contribute. As an Apache guy, I know that the only true way to succeed in open source is to become an active participant within the communities. So that's critical that we contribute upstream to these projects and we accept contributions into the projects that we're open sourcing. And that builds us the partner network and the ecosystem. Why do we do it? Well, because we have to. You saw the slide that Adir had up there. I think it's 42 data centers. It changes every time I see that slide up there. But we have billions and billions of dollars being invested into data centers. For us to return the value of that investment, to make a profit on those data centers around the world, we have to run workloads. So to say no to open source would be suicide. We have to run open source. This data comes from Forrester. So they say that open source is increasingly driving modern applications. Open source innovation is happening in the cloud. And open source accelerates cultural transformation. You know, if we ignored that and didn't engage upstream positively with open source projects, we'd be left for dust. So we are engaging positively upstream with open source projects. Thousands of them. There isn't thousands on this slide, but trust me, there are thousands of projects that we engage with. At every level, the point of this slide is really this left-hand side here. We work at infrastructure layer, database layer, application management layer, every possible layer that we need to. And we work in a combination of contributions upstream to the projects and partnering with people in the ecosystem. We can't possibly become experts in every single open source technology out there. That's where our partnerships come into play. The partners are the experts. We're the experts in Azure, and they're the experts in whatever their technology is. Through the open source communities, we can engage with many, many partners at the same time. So ultimately, the goal is to allow our customers and our partners to build freely using whatever technologies they want, to be able to deploy those technologies anywhere, true hybrid. This is one of the biggest strengths of what we do. Because we only use the upstream open source code, that means what you're running on Azure is the same as what you would be running in your own data center, or heaven forbid, a competitive data center. You can run that same open source wherever you want to run it. So something like HD Insight, which is a big data solution in Azure. It's based on Apache Hadoop and a whole load of other projects within that ecosystem. It's the same upstream code. Any changes we make to make HD Insight work well are available to you in the Apache Hadoop project. And the same is true for pretty much all of the open source that we work with. I say pretty much because I don't guarantee to be watching every single one of them, but that's our intent. So, seems strange at this point to say, why open source? Because isn't that what I've been talking about for the last, however long it's been, 30 minutes? Anybody seen this before? It's a Gartner hype curve. Yeah, some people. This is a consultancy model for how innovation works over time. It's a generalization, like all models that you try to apply to a whole ecosystem, but it is a useful model. Over here on the left-hand side is expectations. So how we expect the innovation to benefit us. And on the right hand, on the x-axis is time. So what happens is, over here, some bright spark comes up with some brand new innovation. And they go, look, if we take all of these components together and put them together in this way and write this glue code, we solve this problem. And it works. And people get excited. And expectations start to rocket. And then the mass media recognizes this. And the mass media says, look at this, it's going to change the world. It solves all these problems. And then we all pile on and go, excellent, I need to solve that problem too. The problem is that it was built to solve a specific problem, not a general problem. And so we very quickly realize that it's not ready yet. Yeah, it can be applied in that use case, but we need to do it differently to apply it to this use case. And we don't have the expertise internally to do that. So therefore it doesn't suit, therefore we're not going to use it. And we end up in this lovely trough of disillusionment. In the trough of disillusionment, many people walk away. I need to solve this problem today, I can't upskill, this old patchy thing will work, this old hacky solution will work. But some people stick around because they do know the technologies, they do understand it, and they do recognize the power of combinatorial innovation. And so they continue to work on it, and they come up with a second generation of projects, or second generation of products. Maybe some services emerge. And it's more generally applicable, and it applies to more people, and we start to regain some of that early promise. Then the key thing happens, and this is where combinatorial innovation really makes the difference. Best practices and methodologies start to emerge. We start to hear success stories from multiple different use cases, and we start to understand how we can bring together a more generic solution that can be applied by people without huge amounts of background in those technologies. And the output of that is the third generation of products. And it's the third generation of products where people really start to build businesses. So that's why we do open source partnerships and so on. If it looks like this, if the sharing of those methodologies and best practices and the expertise looks like this inside of the Apache Software Foundation, what does it look like if we draw the whole open source ecosystem? What does it look like if we add in all of the Microsoft technologies, all of the Google technologies, all of the AWS technologies, every single technology out there, all converging on single shared components? The possibilities are huge. Now, it turns out that according to GitHub's data, and you can love or not GitHub's data, but since Microsoft come up at the top, I love this particular one. Microsoft has more open source contributors on GitHub than any other company. You want to check how they did this? There's the URL. The bit on the right there is just one division within Cloud and Enterprise, which is where I work. Those are all of the people in Developer Division, that's the team that builds things like Visual Studio Code, who are contributing to open source software in some way. I'm not on there because I'm not in that group. There's a whole different one, which is even bigger in the group that I'm in. We have thousands of open source contributors. We want to bring all of our expertise to all of those other people and share those methodologies and best practices so that we can build the best solution, best cloud solution for you to run your workloads for your customers and for your companies. Now, the next slide is a special one that I don't normally put on here. And it's because I'm in Israel. This is my third trip to Israel now. And every time I come to Israel, I learn something new, of course. The first time I came to Israel, I realized how intense the startup ecosystem is here. The second time I came is illustrated by this next slide. This is a cultural difference to my own home country, which is England, where, to use another example, the reason I realized this is I was walking along the beach and there's all these signs that say no swimming. And I'm walking along the beach and there's loads of people swimming, right? So as an Englishman, I'm like, why are they swimming? It says no swimming. As American, I would have been. But as Israeli, what I believe you do is illustrated by this side. Why is that rule there? Do I have to follow that rule, or can I do something different? And you make intelligent decisions. And I've actually taken this home to my son. My son is 12 years old, and I regularly tell him now, look, laws are there to be obeyed, but rules are there to be broken. I think knowing when to break rules is very, very important when it comes to delivering on innovations. If you're not willing to break the rules, you'll never deliver on innovations. So for me, the opportunity to come and speak to an Israeli audience again and say, come work with us in Apache, it's the best place to go and break the rules, is really powerful, especially when you add the startup culture here. So this is a slide with customers on it. We have customers. We're Microsoft. Believe it or not, we've got some customers. The reason I have this one is because somewhere on here it is, BioCatch. BioCatch is a local company. They were one of the first customers to use the service that I created a couple of years ago called Azure Container Service. They reinvented the way that they built their infrastructure. And this was before most people even understood what the importance of containers were. They drove forward, and there's a case study out there as to the benefits that this brought to them. And the amount we learned from working with them about the benefits was immense. And we're taking those learnings to other partners and other customers as a result. JFrog was on one of the earlier slides, and I meant to highlight that as well. Another Israeli company that we're learning a lot from. There are hundreds of companies here that we can learn from. Oh, look at that, it disappeared. It was supposed to go the other way around. It was supposed to get bigger. All right, so this is another quote. This one's from Robert Gordon. Entrepreneurs contribute to economic growth far more than the narrow word innovation can convey. So innovation is critical, but taking innovation to market is the only thing that's truly going to make a difference. The startup culture here in Israel is why I put that slide up there. This country is full of people who are entrepreneurs. It's full of people who are willing to break the rules, and I want to work with you. Microsoft wants to work with you. We have great partner solutions. I've already talked about partners. I'll largely skip over it, although I will highlight this one. This is OpenShift. Hi, Red Hat. So finally, the last slide. This isn't somebody else's quote. This is me. Through open source collaboration, Microsoft is playing its part in combinatorial innovation. Okay? We'll help you take your solutions to the market if you're building product. We'll help you take your solutions to the cloud if you are moving your internal solutions to the cloud. Our key thing is to ensure that we keep the lights on so that you can innovate, so that you can build your startups, your big businesses, your entrepreneurs, so that you can satisfy your customers, whether they be internal or external. So we want to work with you. We're happy to work with you through open source projects. Very happy to work with you directly. Adair over here, who did the introduction, is your local open source lead. He will connect you to anybody you need in Israel. Let's work together. Let's change the future.